We are at the 2016 Festival of Books in Tucson, Arizona, and today we are interviewing Cammie McGovern, the author of A Step Towards Falling. My name is Teresa Hurleth, and I'll be interviewing the author along with
Janelle Velasquez
and Hannah Cruz-Lewis.
Can you tell us about Say What You Will and Just My Luck, your new books?
Yes. So Say What You Will was my first book for young adults. I was an adult author before that. It was inspired by the fact that I am the mother of a 19-year-old with autism, and when he was first diagnosed, I got together with a small group of other moms and started an after-school center for kids with disabilities to take classes and that would mirror what typically developing kids were taking. And I got to know a lot of kids with disabilities through that, and as my own son was growing up, I realized how few depictions of kids with disabilities there were both in books and on TV and movies. And I started to feel like this was a big problem in that I think there's so many kids with disabilities now. It's a much larger population than most people realize, and they're included in almost all schools around the country now, thanks to inclusion. But as my son was getting older outside of elementary school, I was seeing that they're more and more sitting in the back of class with an aide next to them, and I don't think, my son never had issues with bullying. There were just a lot of kids who were mystified, and there was a distance, a real gap of getting to know other kids, and I saw it with all of his friends as well. And so Say What You Will was my first book, and that is about a young woman with cerebral palsy who is highly intelligent but nonverbal, and so she uses a computer to talk. Her final year in high school, she asks her parents to hire aides to, instead of adult aides, her peers to be her aide, and she falls in love with one of them. And A Step Toward Falling is my other YA book, and that is about two teens who are compelled or have to do community service in a class on relationships and sexuality for kids with disabilities, and what they learn there. And you end up following two couples that are sort of falling in love and getting to know each other, and one of the couples both have Down syndrome, and the other are the two typically developing teens. And I wrote that one because there's a class like that at the center I started, and it was a new issue for us, and one that I think all schools across the country are trying to grapple with, of teaching sexuality and relationships to kids with disabilities and what that's going to look like. And it absolutely should be taught. And not only that, I felt like when I sat in on that class, there's a lot that we could all learn. It ends up not being so much about sex, but about communication and trust and understanding and expectations and all those things that every teenager could benefit from. And Just My Luck is my new middle grade novel, and that came out, and that is about the closest to my real family, I would say, and that is three kids. I have three boys, and one of them has autism, and it's told from the point of view of the youngest son. And I think in that one I wanted to write about what it's like to be a family member, and what we've all learned from having in this case a brother, and what also partly what I've learned as a parent, which is that what you assume in the beginning will be such a tragedy when your child is first diagnosed. And one of the many great blessings of having a family member with a disability is you realize it's not a tragedy. That person does not think of themselves as a tragedy ever. And in fact, they're just ready to move on with life, no matter what the limitations are or whatever. Very passionate, very joyful. And so I kind of wanted that to be what lies behind the family now faces a real struggle with when their father has a brain aneurysm, and what they've kind of learned from having the kid with special needs strengthens them all.
You were younger, did you picture yourself being an author?
Oh, what an interesting question. No, as a matter of fact, I loved writing, and I didn't ever see it being a possibility. I was much shyer than I am now, and I had never met a living writer, so I kind of thought they were all dead or something. And I thought I would be an English teacher or a librarian, interestingly. And I'm not sure when it didn't change until I was out of college. I always kept a diary. I always loved writing. I just didn't think I could really make a living at it. And so I love that there's a lot more kids now that raise their hand if you say, do you want to be a writer someday? I feel like that was not something anybody ever did when I was growing up or ever talked about. And so I wish I had been more confident on it.
Can you explain the title, A Step Towards Falling?
Yes, that is from, another good question, that's a quote from Pride and Prejudice, and Pride and Prejudice comes into the book because the teens who have failed to help the girl with Down syndrome when they should have are trying to find a way to really atone for what they did wrong for her. And her thing is that she just wants to be an actress, which I think this is, there's many surprising things about getting to know kids with this and teens with disabilities, but one of them is many of them really love being on stage and really have great dreams of all the same kinds of dreams, but that seems to be a really common thing. And so there's one young woman at this center that I started who particularly loves that, Pride and Prejudice, starring Colin Firth, and had always wanted to be an actress, and she had not been able to do that. That little dilemma. At our high school, it was not very easy, and it's now in the last 4 or 5 years because my son loves acting too, and it's gotten much better. So we've made a little change that they can all be in the chorus now and of the big high school musical. So A Step Toward Falling, the full quote is, dancing is a step toward falling in love. And it was actually the assistant editor who thought of the title. So titles are a funny thing that you throw out a lot of them. Writers are often not the ones who think of their own titles. And everybody just kind of votes. And I was worried that was too far from or hard to, and yet it was the unanimous everybody else, like even marketers weigh in and usually win. So there we go.
So, through your writing, particularly your writing about autism, is there like a larger goal that you would like to have accomplished?
Good. I would say yes. I would say my original motivation in writing for kids was I wanted to tell the stories of these kids that I thought many kids are interested in them and in their stories and are shy and nervous because they're not sure what's going on with that kid in the wheelchair or that kid. Not sure what it's okay to ask, not sure how much you'll have in common, not sure what is okay. And I wanted to tell stories that said these kids are a lot like you, and they want boyfriends, they want relationships, they want love, they love the same kind of pop culture stuff, and just letting kids know that and hopefully recognizing all those common threads. And it would be, so that would be my motivation, is hoping that it kind of brings more kids just even into very short, quick little, those kind of lunch table friendships or those hallway friendships where you're joking about both loving the same movie or those are the things my son loves the most and make the most difference in his life. And hopefully he's got more of that now as kids have gotten to know him a little bit better.
Do you enjoy libraries?
Yes. I have written most of my books in my own local small public library, the Jones in Amherst, Massachusetts. And I have always loved libraries for reasons that go beyond even my ability to explain, but I think it's because I find such peace there, and during certain hard times. I remember when my kids were really young and I would walk them any mom will recognize this. You walk them in a stroller to get them to take a nap, and then you could get into the library while they're asleep and sit there. And there's something so serene about. I remember those being moments where the library wouldn't even know how much it gave me for being a quiet place where I could return and feel like myself again in early motherhood days. I really do, and that's why I go there to write. Isn't that funny?
What would you say is the hardest thing about writing in general, and what was the hardest thing about writing a Stepford?
Very good question. I think there is a point in every book that you write that you think, I can't figure out how to solve the problems that have crept up in this book. You have an initial burst of thinking this is the best idea in the world and it is going to be such a good book, and then you hit this wall that feels like I cannot solve it, I cannot do this. And a lot of times with a lot of books I haven't been able to solve it. So I think most writers, if they're being honest, would say there's a lot of books that are half done or are still in there trying to work out those. A lot of things don't work out the way you want them to, but solving that problem and getting past it and figuring out how to what to do with that. And in the Step Toward Falling is told from 2 points of view, and initially in my first draft it was all told from the typically developing girl Emily's point of view, and it didn't feel alive. I wanted it to be a story about someone who was changed by getting to know kids with disabilities and the way I had been changed as a parent. And I set it aside because it just didn't feel really compelling, and then got the idea when I was talking to this girl again. Belinda was just not a voice in there, and I got the idea of, what if Belinda tells half of this story? And I just went through and wrote that part in maybe 2 weeks of just fast, because somehow that comes easily. The disabled girl's voice, I don't know why, but it was because I knew her and the way she talked and thought. And I think that ended up being maybe even the stronger part of the book, and what people seem to respond to. And it was, I wish I had thought of it earlier, because it's what I originally wanted to do, was let's get in these heads and tell how funny and passionate and interesting someone with Down syndrome is.
So to bounce off of that question, you're an adults, a teens, and a children's author. But how do you transition from one to the other?
Good God, you guys have come up with good questions. I would say, being the mother of kids, I only started doing this about 6 years ago, and I think it came from reading such amazing kids' books to my kids and realizing what was going on in children's writing and how much it had changed since I had been a kid. And so the writing for the different audiences, I would say that young adult books, I think more about my own adolescence and channel that in those old those old diaries that, and then writing for middle grade, with Just My Luck, I think about my kids and what they love reading and what their experiences. So that's much more my youngest son's voice and his issues and friends and funny little details is all from that, I'd say.
When you're about to write a new book, do you plan out your book, or do you kind of just let it flow out?
Great question. I think I do not. I write realistic fiction, and most realistic fiction writers that I know write scenes in, or at least this is my process. I'm not sure how everybody would say they do it. I write scenes to start out with, and I handwrite in a notebook and just pile those up and write really quickly and go in different directions to see what will happen, and then I go back and read it and see what seems to be the best little threads and storylines, and come back and put it all together, and that process is means that you end up writing probably the equivalent of, for a 150-page book, maybe 400 pages. You write a lot to find where the best stuff is. And it's never worked for me to plot ahead of time what's going to happen, because it wouldn't come alive and it wouldn't be funny. It's often, I'm trying to write scenes that are funny, and whatever I think was going to be, usually when I'm writing, whatever I think is fantastic just turns out to be not, and then it was other stuff that I was, the ones that if I am going to be trying to write more plot-driven books, that I will try and outline ahead of time and see how that works. It'll be a different process.
You have 3 sons.
Yes.
You're an author. And you have an active Twitter page. How do you juggle all of that?
Oh, good. I would say I don't do a different job. A lot of writers do another job in addition to writing, and I always did for a long time, and I taught college and I did various things. Once you're not doing that and you're just doing the parenting and writing, you're mostly writing when your kids are at school, and you just organize your day around that, and you try and get as much done in the certain hours. I do think most of the writers I know that are trying to keep it up and keep going have set hours and a set number of pages they do every day, and so then you can stop when you've done your 5 handwritten pages and you go to other things. I would say that's most of our habit.
What is your biggest fear?
Fear. What is my biggest fear? I think it is always, it's not hard to write a book. It is hard, or it's daunting when books come out and people are first reading them, and you do read all those early Goodreads reviews. You stop after a while because it would get too self-absorbed if you kept obsessing over all your reviews. But you definitely worry about a book being liked early on, and so that would be one of my fears. And then all the standard fears about something terrible happening to my children or my family. And maybe I was playing out that fear with this middle grade book, Just My Luck, because something terrible happens to the dad and the family, and that hasn't happened in mine. So maybe I wanted to say, if something terrible happened, we'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. That's how one gets over fears, is you play it out in your mind and you think, well, here's what we'll do, step, step, step. Did you find yours?
Yeah, I do, thank
Good.
you. On average, how long does it usually take you to write one of your books?
So I work on a few books at the same time until I hit that wall and then I set it aside, and I do think for young writers, setting something aside and coming back to it in a few months or a few weeks or whatever, when you have forgotten what you've written long enough for that, it's very easy to see the problem with it, and it's not always easy to solve it, but it's very easy to see what's working and what's not. So I would say I work on things over a long period of time, but it's different projects that I then come back to and push it a little farther forward. So Just My Luck, I had started years ago trying to write something else about my own family, and Say What You Will was based on a failed adult novel where the only thing that worked was it was the character of Amy after she had graduated from college. It was a whole long kind of mystery novel, and the only thing I liked in there was a chapter where she's remembering this friendship with her friend, the one friend she made in high school. And so I wrote that. I just took one chapter. It's the only time I've ever done that, where I took one of a failed novel and just made that all that book. And that went quickly after I got that idea, but I had been writing the other thing for so long. So usually I say a year, but it's stretched out over more years than that.
So how many, if any, or other ones, how many many books have you like started, but then you just like lost interest in and just stopped?
Oh,
or?
that's a really interesting question, because the truth, a lot of writers, it's very hard to work for a long time on a book that fails. And I've done that with 2 adult books. And that's part of what took me over to writing for kids. Now that I'm here, I don't think I'll ever go back. I really love writing for teen and middle grade, and I just love this world. I wish I had gotten into it sooner, because I feel like it's where I belong. It's where there's lots of different possibilities, where the readers are really engaged and interested. There's many wonderful things about this world. So I would have said, then it took me a long time to get published in the first place, and so I had written 3 books before I got published. Sort of had 2, like they're a good 5. I just haven't counted.
So, speaking of the writing process and writing in general, could you tell us a little bit about possible future books that you are considering writing?
Yes. Well, I have another middle grade book coming out in a year that is told from the point of view of a dog who has failed out of service dog school and goes to live with a family that's got an autistic boy, and which is what happens. There's a lot of those service dogs that don't quite make it, but they're just fabulous little dogs. And after that, I would like to take a little bit of a break from writing about disability directly, and do it's another middle grade is my idea. That's sort of a fairy tale reimagining of the wild swans. And so those are my 2 ideas right now, or the 2 upcoming.
When did you start writing your first book, and like how did you like start piecing it together?
So I didn't really seriously start writing until after college. So anybody who's a young writer who's already thinking about it and doing it is ahead of me. I wrote for my school newspaper, though, I will say that. And I then wrote plays for a long time and screenplays, and didn't write fiction until I was about 25. But now I'm 52, so now I've been at it for a while. But and then when you start writing fiction, you're usually starting with short story writing and trying to get those published, and I probably did that for maybe 10 years before I even attempted a novel.
Was there any point where you wanted to stop, or you questioned why you started writing?
Oh, wow, good. Every writer has those moments of thinking, I am not good enough to do this. I cannot do this, because it did take me a long time to get published. And I had gotten into some very good programs. I went to the University of Michigan for my MFA, and I was a Stegner Fellow at Stanford, which is supposed to be the 5 top fiction writers. It's a really prestigious fellowship. And the problem with those prestigious fellowships is you think they made a mistake on just me. Everybody else here deserves to be. And you have to wrestle with your own insecurity, especially when I couldn't get the book I wrote there published for a long time. And it's good, though. It's good to have to wrestle with all of that and then come out the other end and think, I'm just going to work harder and I'm going to think of a different idea. So I would say I haven't wanted to quit after I finally got published, and I have loved it ever since, even though there has been great highs and lows in the whole publishing process, but I just love it too much. Yeah.
Would you say there are any authors or books that have inspired you?
Many, many. Well, I always say that the time I thought I really want to write a kid's book is when I finished reading When You Reach Me by Rebecca Stead. And that book is so cool for so many different reasons. And you close it at the end and want to figure out how she put all those pieces together for the mystery. And for some reason, I also think it's accessible in a way that makes you think, I could write a book like this. And then you try to, and you realize she's brilliant. It's brilliant in ways that you can't easily mimic. And so that was what got me started. And then I would say there's many books I loved when when I was young. The Beverly Cleary books I've gone back and reread and think they're even better now to read as an adult. And that's not true of all the old books I remembered loving, but those are funny with also serious. I always want my books to be funny with a serious, and they all had that. The father had lost his job, the mom is not. There's all these darker elements that I never picked up on when I was a kid, interestingly. And now they just scream out at me as an adult.
Would you want to give any advice to your younger self, whether on life or on writing?
Oh, be less shy when I was young. Be more confident of what I wanted to do. And don't be afraid to say, I would like to be a writer. I'm so admiring of young people that do say and go after what they want. I was needlessly hesitant to do all that. And it's interesting. My sister was an actress from a very young age, and we grew up in LA, and she always pranced around saying, I want to be an actress. And then, lo and behold, she got cast in something when she was a senior in high school. And I think that did change me a little bit, thinking it's okay to say you want something. That's how she got it. She said she wanted it. And I think that was very good for me. I think our parents were very scared of all of those artsy things or impractical things. And they would have to admit she's done okay, and it's been okay for us to do those.
So how would you describe your own style as far as writing goes?
I would say I try to write realistic fiction that finds the humor and the pathos of, and have it be real kids and real interactions as much as possible.
So what celebrity or author would you want to meet, living or dead?
Oh, that's a hard one for me. Well, maybe just because I said Beverly Cleary, I would be interesting. I'm interested in people that wrote about some aspects of their life, and I think she did. Jeannie Birdsall, who wrote Penderwicks, if you guys are not too old for those. Do you know them? She lives near, and so I do know her, and she's wonderful because her niece and nephew grew up on our street, and the Gardem in the Penderwicks is supposed to be the street that I live on with the niece and nephew of hers. And she's wonderful, wonderfully wise about many things. So I've loved knowing her.
Are there any other characters in your novels that you drew on real people for?
Yeah, good question. So Amy in Step Toward Falling was based on one of the kids that I started that whole children's center with. Is all of our kids, her mom, so there were 5 moms that were starting the center, and she was 3 years old when we were all of our kids were young, and she had cerebral palsy, and when we were having these meetings to get together, all of our little boys, one had Downs, one had Williams syndrome, mine had autism, and the boys would run around like crazy, and this one little girl, she couldn't walk or sit up or roll over, let alone talk, and she would lie on this blanket in the middle of the little group that we were sitting in, and I had always thought, wow, this one is the hardest, this would be the saddest situation to have your little girl that can't move or do anything. And then at some point during one of our meetings, one of us made a joke, and she laughed before any of the rest of us did. And I thought, oh my God, she understands every single thing we're saying. And here's this girl. So I would say that's where I actually, and that was almost 18, 17 years ago, that's where I got the idea for a character. What would that be like if she was really super smart? And her mom had always said she's really smart, and all of us had said, sure she is. And then it was just clear, and then she had this beautiful little twinkly laugh, and that was my imagining of what her future would be like.
So how do you get your ideas for novels? Do you around everyday life, and then you just realize, oh, I should write a book about this?
I would say say I get more ideas from reading a lot, and then I get something, I read something, and then I pull life into, like, whatever it is. Oh, this would be cool if trigger seems to happen more when during reading, and then I apply everything from life, so I'm not stealing an idea from somebody else. It's usually I'm not stealing an idea, maybe I am, but it's more that I think, oh, what if you did a twist on whatever this was, or it's a line somebody said. I do think reading helps you keep going and thinking of new ideas.
Okay, well, we've come to the end of our time here. Thank you so much.
I'm so impressed with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you,
Great
Ms. McGovern.
questions. Very, very thoughtful.